Unpacking Mormonism is a subsidiary of daisygirlcommunications, LLC. All content herein is intended for educational purposes only and does not replace the advice or counsel of your personal care provider. I'm telling
So
you,
excited.
you do that woohoo all the time.
I know, but it's just a good word.
It's a good word?
6 letters, 4 O's.
Wow.
It's great.
I never would have called
I'm
it
excited
a
to be
word
here.
as much as I would say it's a sound that
Woo!
has. All right. Alrighty, so yes, we are very excited to be here today. So last episode, we talked a lot about your amygdala and your cortex and tried to normalize and illustrate how that process in our brain works. And the question is, now what? What do we do with this information, Sarah? And so that's what we're here today. Our intention is to teach us, or to teach our listeners. Let me rephrase that. Our intention for today is to teach our listeners that our emotions are informants and what their purpose is in our life. And then we're going to give some specific examples from the scriptures, both the Bible and I believe the Book of Mormon as well, to illustrate some of that messaging that we get from religion about our emotions being right or wrong. And we're going to challenge that a little bit. And then we're going to hopefully encourage you to shift the way that you view and experience your emotional responses so that they can better serve you moving forward in your life's journey.
I love the fact that one of the big things I've learned, you said that all emotions are informants, and I love that. For me, it helps to say all emotions are normal.
Yes.
And they're informants, right? So we need to understand why we have them, but first we need to understand they're normal. It's okay for us to, so they're normal and it's okay, right?
Right.
It's okay for me to be angry right now. It's okay for me to be sad. It's okay for me to just hate your guts and then process them and move forward. But first and foremost, normalize the fact that I feel this way. This is a normal thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. So Mason, I before we did this episode, I sent you a homework assignment and you said something that was really interesting. So I'd like for you to take the opportunity now to kind of explain the insights that you gained in researching the topic for today. So I sent Mason with an assignment, something along the lines of find some resources in the scriptures and in general conference talks that illustrate doctrinal foundations or cultural foundations for our emotional responses. And you came away from that with some really interesting insights.
Right, so we're talking about messaging, right? And so we'll get into some of the scriptures here later. But as I looked at all these scriptures and talks and all this stuff, the thing that really stuck out to me is that when it comes to feelings, they're almost exclusively related to the spirit, either the presence or the absence of it. For instance, joy is almost entirely related to righteousness or obedience or eternity, whereas anger, shame are almost exclusively related to sin. And those are about the only emotions that I really could find. Anger, shame, joy are about the only emotions that really come up on a regular basis inside the scriptures. And so that got me to thinking and just kind of this question to get us started out. How do we learn to recognize emotions as the informants that they are without judging our moral character for feeling them? And I think that's the big question that I know you want to teach us about emotions, and so that's where I kind of wanted to start there.
Right. I love that. And I would like to just, in answer to that question, I think it's important to recognize our emotional responses are not a moral thing. They're a biological thing. And so they don't, our emotional responses are not an indication of our virtue. They're not an indication of our value as a human being. They're not an indication of who we are, our moral standards. It's not an indication of that. And it's definitely not an indication of our worthiness. I'd also like to add that, one of the messages that we get from the church is that the Spirit utilizes our emotions to speak with us. And I kind of go back and forth. I don't really know where I personally stand on that, because I no longer believe in the God and the Jesus the way they are described in Mormon doctrine at all. But I'm also not atheist, but I don't really have a place that I've landed fully on that. But what I know from my work is that our emotions, as we listen to them and we get curious about them, we are better able to understand what's going on in our reality. And so this kind of brings me to the idea of internal and external sources, which we're going to dedicate a whole episode in the future on internal and external sources. But in this case, an external source would be Mason telling me how I feel, versus my feelings, my internal dialogue, my self voice. That's an internal message of how I feel or what I'm experiencing. And I have found that when religion, specifically in my experience with Mormonism, says, oh, well, that feeling is coming from God, it makes me begin to rely on external sources to guide and inform what's going on in my individual reality. And for me, that's a really dangerous place to be. And like I said, we're going to definitely dig into internal and external sources in a future episode. Today, we really want to focus on those emotions, but I just kind of wanted to put that plug in that as we are able to learn what to do with these emotional responses, both the uncomfortable ones and the comfortable ones and the ones in between that areas, we learn, what to do with them and how to navigate them. We can understand ourselves better. We can take care of ourselves better. We function better in our relationships with others. It's easier to make and keep friends. All of these really great things happen. And that is an internal informative source.
Basically just coming to understand yourself better.
Right. Well, because oftentimes, Mason, what you talked about was that in your study, you recognized that the majority of the references to emotional responses in the scriptures were joy, which is good, righteous, and from
always
God.
Associated with doing the right thing.
Yeah. Right. Whereas anger is associated with bad, and Satan's got control of you, and you need to get rid of that feeling in order to get back to the joy. And we call that polarized thinking, or black and white thinking is another way to look at that. And I would like to say our emotions, and kind of echo you, Mason, our emotions are neither good nor bad. They are natural. They are biological. They are informative. And so I think that that's a really good thing too. So Mason, why don't you jump into our first scriptural resource?
Well, question for you. I thought that you were going to talk about kind of the anatomy of emotions.
I'm going to do that later in a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
So you just want to go right to the first scripture?
Yeah, let's go right to the first scripture. I'm going to talk about the anatomy of our emotions. So, hey, spoiler alert, we're going to be talking about the anatomy of emotions, or kind of what they do inside our body, and then what to do with that at the end. That's going to be in that last segment of our podcast today. So hang on tight, it's coming.
So quick little information session here. So if you're from Mormonism, associated with Mormonism, you recognize what we call the JST, or the Joseph Smith translation. If you're not from Mormonism, then you won't recognize that, of course. So Mormons believe that Joseph Smith was a prophet, that he translated the Book of Mormon, that it's scripture, and that then he also did what's called an inspired translation of the Bible, where he went through and, in essence, corrected some of the mistakes that have been made over the years, either from translation or from people just deliberately taking stuff out. Well, that's the JST, or the Joseph Smith translation. And so we're going to be using pieces of both the Bible as the King James Version of the Bible, and then adding in some of those Joseph Smith editions or translations, whatever you want to call them.
Well, and I think it's important here to jump in and say there's also a lot of information or evidence that Joseph Smith may have. We use the word plagiarized. I think that's a really strong word, because it may not be word for word, but the similarities are so strong that it really kind of plagiarism fits, or I believe Bill Reel and RFM said it was like a shadowing of those sources. And so I want to refer you, if you're interested in learning more about did Joseph Smith plagiarize, and I will use that word here, plagiarize the Joseph Smith translation of the Bible, in episode 1338 of Mormon Stories with Haley Wilson Lemmon. That is a great source material place to go to see where that accusation comes from, what was going on there. I believe the accusation is that Joseph Smith heavily borrowed and pulled from Adam Clarke's Bible commentary to create these Joseph Smith translations. So when you later hear me say, yeah, and then Joseph Smith went and changed the scripture to this, I don't believe that that was an inspired thing. I'm in line with Haley Wilson Lemmon, that there's a lot of evidence here that says he plagiarized those and that it was a work of 16th century editing of the Bible.
And I'm still in line with the idea that Joseph Smith did translate and did do those things. We're not here to argue that point. We're here to talk about the messages that can come from the scriptures, and not even necessarily the intended messages. Like, it's easy for you to have a conversation and have an intended message, but also send lots of other messages.
Right.
Even like nonverbal stuff, right? You can be saying this, but your posture is saying something different. So
Absolutely.
we want to focus on the messaging, not necessarily what you believe about Joseph Smith or even the scriptures in general.
Right.
So we're going to start with Ephesians chapter 4, verse 26. And this, again, all coming from the version I have, which is the King James version of the Bible. In this is Paul writing, and he says, "Be ye angry and sin not. Let not the sun go down upon your wrath." Now, did you want me to read the Joseph Smith translation part first, or do you want to talk about that?
I want to talk about that. So what are your thoughts on that scripture, Mason?
Well, we excuse me. We talked a lot about messaging, and I feel like messaging in Mormonism, and again, you and I bring that up because that's just our experience. I don't really know intimately what the messaging in other situations are, but it feels like some of my encounters with other religions is that it's just not okay to be angry.
Yeah.
Right? That anger is not an appropriate thing. And certainly anger can lead to lots of things. Like if I'm angry and then I go hit somebody,
that's
obviously that's not okay.
Right.
I can certainly say a lot of things in anger that I wouldn't necessarily say if I wasn't angry. But that is, it's almost like the message is then criminalizing anger. Well, because all this stuff comes from anger must be bad.
Anger must be bad. Well, and what you're talking about is when my amygdala gets fired up. Angry usually triggers an amygdala response. And in that amygdala response, remember, one of those first responders is fight. We as human beings tend to do a lot of really shitty stuff when we are in that area of our brain. But I agree with you, Mason, that does not make anger mad. Anger is absolutely an informant. I would also agree with you. In my experience with clients from many different ethnicities and religions and whatnot, anger is commonly viewed as being a bad or a sinful emotion. And I want to say that, I just disagree with that from a professional and kind of a scientifical,
Sure.
is that even a word? Scientific.
We make up lots of words. We make up words.
So
it's almost like we're from the South. Jeff Foxworthy would be happy.
Jeff Foxworthy would be happy. From that scientific place, I'm still going to come back to the conclusion that our emotions are informants and that we can feel angry and respond in a healthy manner.
Yeah.
But we've got to learn, what do we do with that anger before we respond? And again, because that amygdala fires so quickly, sometimes we get bit by it.
Absolutely.
But
I love this message. So coming back to this message, a lot of things. I mean, we're looking at 6 words, but a lot of messages here. And I love the fact, it almost sounds like a command, be ye angry, which I don't think was his intention, but it almost sounds that way. But he says, and sin not, right? So he's kind of giving permission for the fact that, hey, you're gonna be angry.
Well, is there a question mark at the end of that statement, or is there a period at the end of that statement? So this isn't...
Actually, there's a colon at the end of that statement.
There's a colon. Okay, and then what about, is there a question mark before, like, how did they end that?
Another colon, actually.
The Bible, welcome to fragments, run-on sentences, and all kinds of terrible grammatical issues.
Absolutely. We don't read it for the grammar.
There's a huge difference if we say, if we read that scripture with a period at the end, or if we read that scripture with a question mark at the end.
Sure. And actually, the JST kind of changes that. In the JST, that first statement ends with a question mark, and we'll get to that here in just a second.
Right.
But I love, so that first piece of there, the message is, don't, control your behavior related to your anger, which I think is an appropriate message, being is that your anger can lead to lots of bad things. Well, but also, how many people had perceived an injustice? Because really, anger is about an injustice. Have perceived an injustice and then pushed themselves on to become a better person. I got fired by that stupid person, fired me. I'm never likely going to happen again. I'm going out and I'm going to be a lot better. Their anger drove them to something positive.
Well, I'm gonna challenge you a little bit on this, Mason. You said anger really is, and I'm gonna say that is an interpretation of what anger is, because we also find that anger can be protective.
Sure.
Anger can be defensive. I mean, anger can be a lot of things. And I agree with you in that scripture. If we end it with a period, there seems to be, or there appears to be, a separation between the emotional response and the, hey, don't go out and sin, meaning, and I would expand that to, hey, you can be angry, do no harm in your anger. But then when you read the Joseph Smith translation, go ahead, Mason, let's talk about this Joseph Smith translation, because I think once we add in the Joseph Smith translation, we get kind of this, what I would call a toxic message.
Well, do you want to go into the Joseph Smith translation now, or do you want to talk about the second sentence?
No, I'm going to do the second sentence later. Okay. Go ahead and do the Joseph Smith translation now.
All right, so the Joseph Smith translation kind of changes that whole thing. It says, can ye be angry and not sin? So you add in one word, you make it a question, and suddenly anger is sin.
Well, and the real thing is it a question that answers itself? Like, does it say yes, or does it say no, or does it just kind of leave us with this idea that, ooh, I don't know?
Right, so it doesn't answer itself, which definitely lends itself to lots of different interpretations. I feel like the intended answer there is that the answer is no, you cannot be angry. Right. And of course, people can interpret that differently. The message I feel like I get from that is you cannot be angry and not sin.
Right. And I think that the reason that so many people would interpret it that way inside the Mormon church is because we've got all of these other scriptures, and we're going to get to a couple of those later on, that talk about contention being of the devil, and people who are angry are foolish, and these other really strongly shaming responses. And so, yeah, Mason, I agree with you that once you turn this into a solid question, that word can we, or those two words can we, that Joseph Smith changed there, does have, while maybe subtle, still significant change to the meaning of the underlying scripture. So I think that with that, I mean, we can take the good side and say, hey, be angry but do no harm. But then that second half of that scripture says something along the lines of, don't go to bed angry.
Well, and before you move there, you mentioned something that I think is going to drive us into the next verse that we talk about. I think you said it, was that it kind of triggers, now we're into a shame response, right? Yeah. So it's almost telling us, if you're angry, you're bad, right?
Right.
And so rather than allowing us the ability to be curious about why we're angry, we're immediately shutting off
we're thought
that
stopping.
Anger response because, oh my gosh, I can't be sinning. I can't do that. I got to stop being angry. So instead of thinking about why am I angry? What is it? Is it because I stepped on Legos after I told the kids to clean it up?
Or is
right?
Right.
And now I can't explore that. I can't go to the kids and say, hey, look, this really frustrates me.
And it hurt my foot.
And I'm tired after working. There's a lot of things going into this, but this really frustrates me when I ask you to do something, you don't do it. Then I can have a conversation with my kids.
Right. It changes the way
grow.
You approach discipline.
Right. But instead, I've got to go back into my bedroom and shame myself and beat myself, 40 lashes now because I'm sinning, or I've got to get right down on my knees. And I've got to repent right now because I can't ever have sin angry. Just sitting there, right? So now I'm in this shame cycle, and instead of being able to manage the problem in a healthy way, I'm stuck beating myself up. And that's the real, for me, that's the most dangerous part of this message, is that it puts me in a place where I can't deal with the actual problem. I've got to deal with almost the created problem.
I would agree with that, yeah. And the responses, the timing of that happens so quickly that it's very difficult for many of us to shift that perspective and be able to say, is it okay to be mad at my kids because they haven't put their toys away and I hurt my foot for that? Well, yeah, absolutely. Do I need to go into the room and yell and scream at them and ground them from their Legos and have this really intense response that causes them to be afraid of me? No, absolutely not. Now, having said that, I've yelled at my kids because of, Legos all over the floor. I am in no way saying that I am perfect at this. Absolutely not. But that identifying what's the underlying trigger going on here is really healthy. So, all right, Mason. So are you ready to move into the don't go to bed angry?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go ahead.
Awesome. So the don't go to bed angry at each other scripture that, and I find this is a really common thing. I hear my couples coming in
many people, I got that message from my parents, I think.
Yeah, I got it from mine.
Don't go to bed angry, right? And you hear it all the time.
You and I got it at that Laugh Your Way to a Better Marriage seminar in the military when we did that strong bonds thing. That one came up.
Yeah.
So this is a really common
is a strong message.
theme.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say, y'all, it's a myth. That's bullshit counsel coming out of the Bible right there. And yes, lightning is going to strike me and I'm going to die, but I want to make sure y'all know that is not healthy counsel for couples. And the reason is because we talk again about that amygdala and that frontal cortex. Well, today I'd like to add in something called the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. For those of you who are not familiar with what the Maslow's hierarchy of needs is, feel free to Google it. There's all kinds of resources. Most of them are fairly accurate. Maslow is spelled MASLOW''S. That's your Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And one of the things that we have learned from the research of John and Julie Gottman is that when we try and argue or problem solve in relationships when we are tired or hungry or afraid that I'm going to lose my job, that our ability to come out of that is impaired. And I don't think that's directly from John and Julie Gottman, but it is absolutely a part of their curriculum, which is I need to approach difficult things with my spouse when I'm in the brain space to be prepared to stay in my frontal cortex. And when you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, one of the things that you're going to see is that it looks like a little food pyramid. And at the bottom of that food pyramid, it says, in order for my brain to be in that creative problem-solving space, I need to have food in my system and know where my next meal is coming from. I need to be well hydrated. I need to have water. I need to have sleep. I need to be warm and comfortable. I need to be well rested. So arguing about the Legos, like if I step on Legos when I have the flu, chances are my kids are going to get cussed at, versus if I've had a long day at work, they might get yelled at, versus I'm in a good mental space and step on that Lego, I'm probably going to respond a lot better in that. And so we've really got to check in with ourselves and honor this Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Yeah. we learn that when people have their physiological needs met, meaning food, water, shelter, these types of things, their brain is better able to function. That's one of the reasons why the schools have instilled their school breakfasts for everybody, is because children learn better when they're not hungry. If you're hungry, it's hard to learn things like math because I don't need math to live. And again, we're getting back into that fight or flight response, that amygdala and that cortex brain. If my food source is being threatened, my amygdala is going to kick into high gear. And remember that cortex and that amygdala is kind of like a dimmer switch, in that the more that amygdala is fired up, the less the frontal cortex is.
Right.
Our next rung up on Maslow's little pyramid here is our emotional and intellectual security. I'm not going to be able to have a problem-solving conversation with somebody, especially my spouse, if there is abuse going on, if I'm afraid of getting hit, if I'm sensitive to being yelled at. Like, some people do well getting yelled at and some of us just don't. I personally do not like being yelled at. And when I get yelled at, my amygdala kicks in and I'm not hearing anything that you say and I'm just ready to fight back. Our next rung up is our friendships, our sense of connections. We're talking about the health of relationships in general, or that feeling of belonging. When we've got those 3 bottom rungs in place, then our ability to be respectful, to honor people's opinions, even when they're different than ours, to be creative and have good problem-solving skills gets better. And when we're talking, so that 4th rung up talks about esteem. If I'm in an environment where I'm well respected, that's when I'm going to be able to give my best work, which is achieving one's full potential or self-actualization. That's when those creative juices really get going. If I have somebody on my team that I'm constantly arguing with and cannot seem to function comfortably with, that's going to impair my creativity and my problem solving and my connection and all of these other things. So when we look at this Maslow's hierarchy of needs and we come back to this scripture in Ephesians, so Ephesians 4:26, that says, don't let the sun go down on your anger, I'm going to counter that with, sometimes, if not most of the time, if we're having an argument or something's bothering me at the end of the day, being able to say, Mason, I love you. My amygdala has been hijacked. We need to talk about this tomorrow morning.
Which has happened many times in our relationship.
Many
times. Well, maybe
times.
Not many times,
No,
but
I'd
it's
say
happened
many.
in our relationship.
Absolutely. And it's, can I get a good night's sleep? And we'll talk about this again tomorrow when you get home from work. When I wake up the next morning, I recognize what an idiot I was. I recognize where I was maybe overly defensive. And I'm better able to get back into the topic with you.
Right.
And usually the resolution comes within minutes.
Much more quickly, yeah.
Right. And so, like I said, this was really a myth. Now, having said that, I'm going to give you a warning. Warning. Something else that the Gottmans teach is you can't just say to your partner, I'm going to bed, and walk away from your partner without establishing a return time. So the Gottmans research demonstrates when you're physiologically agitated because of uncomfortable emotional stimuli, that step number 1 is take a break, calm down, and come back to the argument. But if we don't say, I'll be back in 20 minutes, 30 minutes, after dinner, tomorrow after work, or whatever, and then follow through with that, we will leave our partner feeling abandoned.
Right.
Which is going to trigger their amygdala. And usually what I see in my clinic is when one person's like, I'm out of here, and they forget to give me 20 minutes and I'll check back in with you. What I end up seeing is the partner that is having the break taken, quote unquote, against them, even though it's not really against them, will tend to follow the person that said they need a break and kind of hound and badger them. So if you're seeing that dynamic in your relationship, you need to verbalize and set a time where you're going to come back to the conversation, and then you actually need to follow through and come back. Otherwise, you're triggering your partner's amygdala as well. And then once again, not getting anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to recognize that everybody does this a little bit differently. Like some couples might find that if they go to bed without resolving the problem, things just get worse. And so that may be perfect advice for you is don't go to bed angry. But most people, like you said, and certainly that's been the case in our relationship, we've been able to handle lots of arguments and get it resolved before we go to bed. We've also had lots of arguments where we've had to say, hey, we need to stop. We need to come back in the morning.
Yeah.
And usually things get resolved pretty quickly. So I love that. And it's about learning how to recognize how you guys work best together.
Right.
And so there's a lot to get there. I also love that. I think I studied Maslow's hierarchy of needs the first time when I first went to college back in like 95, I think is when I saw it first. It might have even been high school, right? It was a long time ago.
Right. It's been around for a long time.
But it's completely different now than it was when I first saw it. Like there's been a lot of updates and there's a lot more emotional maturity in that pyramid. There's a lot of focus on the emotional necessities of life, and I love that. And I love that explanation. You did a very good job of explaining that. Thank you.
I appreciate that. I don't know if the emotional piece was left out of the Maslow's hierarchy back in 95 when you were in high school. Because I haven't looked at them that old recently, so I don't remember that from my studies. But I can say that it's pretty common for us to be like, oh yeah, I totally get that I need those physiological needs met in order to have all of this creative stuff, and maybe skipped over the emotional side. So that would be an interesting course of study. So I'm not going to say conclusively that the Maslow's hierarchy of needs has changed, but rather our ability to recognize the value of that emotional security and safety has definitely grown since you went to high school a million years ago, you old fart.
Well, and the focus is different, absolutely. And I don't remember all of Maslow's hierarchy from when I studied it, but I don't remember the focus being on so much emotional connection and stuff. So
if you ever
love
forget,
that's changed.
I have like 3 of those posters hanging up in my office.
But do you have the one from 1995?
No.
All right, then. Worthless.
No. Worthless. All right, moving right along. Mason, go ahead. What was your other scripture was the one, so we were going to talk about the contradictory messages about anger in the Bible. And so Mason's got 2 scriptural references that he's going to use here. The first one is Ephesians 4, verse 31.
Okay, so this isn't necessarily contradictory to the one we just read, but I want to read this. So it's Ephesians 4:31. It says, "Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and evil speaking be put away from you with all malice." And what's interesting to me,
that's so funny. What does malice mean, Mason? You looked it up.
So yeah, I had to look it up, right? Because malice, we think of malice as a bad thing, so I had to look it up, and I wrote it down.
Time out. We think of malice as a bad
Okay, good.
thing.
Yeah, good catch, right? So we do. We think of, at least, maybe I
That's
shouldn't
a polarization.
Maybe I shouldn't say we, but it feels like we as a society think of malice as a bad thing. And the definition is...
Whoa. Hang on. Before you get to that definition, I want to throw out there, malice isn't bad. Rather, it's really uncomfortable.
Well, I guess for me, then the question would be, I've never thought of malice as an emotion. I've thought of it as a way in which I do something.
Okay.
And so from that perspective, then, malice, I consider my own life to be a bad thing because of this definition, a desire to cause pain, injury, or distress to another.
Okay.
And so looking at it from that perspective.
Right. I like that. You're right. So I would say feeling vengeful is uncomfortable. Acting in malice would generally mean I'm causing harm to myself or somebody else in some way, and therefore would not be a good thing.
Right. Now we're not talking about a feeling, we're talking about an unacceptable action. Yeah.
Well, don't use the word unacceptable. I would just utilize the word an action.
Well, I can see that point of view. For me, if I'm doing something with the intent to harm somebody else,
that would be
that's unacceptable.
I would agree with that.
And I think as a society in general, that's considered unacceptable.
All right.
But so then I had to look at, going back to this verse, now let's read it again, right? Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and evil speaking be put away from you with all malice. And the concern here, so I don't necessarily have a problem with the intent of this message, right? I don't think that bitterness and wrath are a good thing for me. And again, if you're talking about emotions, not good or bad, but I don't feel like they're a good thing for me. I don't think they have a positive impact on my life. And anger and clamor and evil speaking, I don't really feel like those are positive things in my life, although they can be.
Right.
I don't feel like they are for me. And so the intended message is, hey, get those things out of your life. But the idea that we need to do it with all malice, it almost feels like the message is...
get rid of your anger with anger.
Sure, yeah, that was the first thing you pointed out. I was like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, right? For me, it feels like it falls right back into the shame message, like, get those things away from you right now.
Yeah, but don't sit with them.
Yeah, but if I go back and I look, why am I bitter?
Right.
If you're telling me I can't be bitter, then I'm going to hold that. Like, maybe I'll get rid of the bitterness, but inside me, it's going to turn to resentment.
Right, because you're shutting it down before you've been able to, what we call, complete the emotional cycle. Yeah. Right, so going back to Emily Nagoski's book, Burnout, she talks about completing that emotional cycle. And Mason, what you're pointing out is this scripture in Ephesians basically says, get rid of those emotions, not get curious about them, understand where they're coming from, work through them, and come out on the other side more informed about who you are and what was going on for you or what was going on in that relationship or that interaction, but just get rid of it, which is another form of thought stopping. And that's very dangerous. Absolutely.
Right. And I don't know that that's the intended message, right? Again, we're not here to talk about what the intended message was. We're here to talk about the messages that can be received from this kind of stuff. And I feel like one of the messages that can be received is that if you hang on to these things at all, you're sinning again.
Right. You're bad. You're a sinner.
And what does sin do? Sin creates a barrier between me and God. Well, if I want to be close to God...
According to Mormon doctrine, absolutely.
According to Christian doctrine, sin creates a
separation between you and God.
me and God. Yeah.
Right.
And I don't know, Muslims, Hindu, I don't know those religions well enough to talk about those things. But my experience is Christianity. And Christianity, when you sin, you put a barrier between me and God. So now, God, who I need the most in my life because I'm bitter, because I'm angry, because I've been hurt, because I'm resentful. Right. God is the person I need the most in my life. I've created the barrier, right? It's not somebody else. I've created the barrier, and now the person I need most in my life, I don't have.
You don't have access to. Well, and I'm going to say, you're kind of speaking in extremes, because mainstream Christianity is going to say, no, all you have to do is reach out and ask God and he'll be right there again. And Mormonism teaches that as well, but Mormonism also teaches God cannot look upon sin with the least degree of allowance. Right. And so I would say that a lot of people are going to take that scripture or that idea and say, yeah, but all we have to do is reach out for him and he's right there to pick us up. Whereas a lot of other people, especially those that struggle with religious OCD or scrupulosity, are going to give themselves the message, I am bad. So because I feel bitter, I am bitter. That's a difficult thing. That's where we really jump into that shame cycle. So I really like that illustration and would just like to add, some people aren't going to pick up the intensity of that message the same way other people are. And that's also okay.
Yeah.
Well, and I found it interesting because then when we jump to the other scripture, the Colossians 3:8, which is basically the same message, but now, go ahead, Mason, read that one.
It's going to take me a second. I didn't have that one written down.
Oh, man.
It'll only
You're
take
so
me a minute.
slow.
Yeah, that's helping. Good job.
Slow. Just stay zen.
Goodness gracious. So Colossians 3:8 says, but now ye also put off all these, anger, wrath, malice, blasphemy, filthy communication out of your mouth. So the verse is almost talking about the same thing, the same idea, at least from the way I read it. But in this case, of course, malice is included as one of those things you need to get rid of.
Right. So in one verse, get rid of it with malice. And then in the next verse, don't use malice. Get rid of that too.
Well, and almost, so I feel like the underlying message there is that it's not okay to be malicious towards other people, but it's okay to be malicious toward yourself.
Yeah.
And I don't like that message at all, right? Like, I can be malicious. Well, I don't know if I'm malicious towards myself, but I can be pretty
really
hard on
hard
myself.
on yourself, yeah.
And maybe that's, common for a lot of people. I don't know. But I can be hard on myself. And it's almost like that's supported, right? The idea of Christianity is to be hard on yourself. And I don't know that is always helpful. I think most of the time it's not helpful. Again, sometimes it can be. Like when I'm hard on myself and I go, oh man, that is not how I wanted to handle this.
Right.
And then I can sit and be self-reflective and go, what's going on? If I can sit with those anger feelings, or my wife conscientiously goes, hey, you sound grumpy. And I'm able to... And I'm able to
that
sit
was
back.
Last night.
I know
when you
that
got
never
home from
happens,
work, right? I was like, "Whoa, you're grumpy. What's going on?"
Right, and I'm able to stop and go, "I'm not grumpy. So what's going on?" Or I'm able to stop and go, "Yeah, I am grumpy. What's going on?"
Well, and I appreciate it. Last night you said, "I'm not grumpy, but I am definitely sounding grumpy."
Yeah.
And as soon as you made that connection, there was a visible and experiential shift.
Right.
And that level of intensity, I don't know what it was, if it's just you're coming home and because normally you don't come home like that, but you were able to shift. So
yeah. Well, and I don't like the message, because again, we're talking about the messages.
Right.
I don't like the message that it's okay for me to beat up on myself. Don't do it to anybody else, but it's okay for me to beat up on myself. And if I look at my value, I have as much value as anybody else. And while I want to improve, I do not want to be beating myself up.
Right. Well, and I think that's, again, speaking from my Mormon perspective, that's a big issue. There's always this, you have to do more. We're so busy, you got to endure to the end. It's never enough, never enough. Like I almost want to start singing from The Greatest Showman, never enough, never, never, right? Because it doesn't.
I'm the one that bursts into song here, not you.
I'm just trying to be like Mason instead of, what is it? What would Jesus do? WJD. Mine is WWMD.
Sacrilege.
Right, but there's this culture in the Mormon church that I'm never enough in this life, and that it doesn't matter how much I'm giving, how much money I'm giving, how much time I'm giving, how much I'm repenting, how much whatever. There's always this, you've got to do more. You've got to do more. And we tend to glorify this struggle, and we tend to glorify and reward beating up on ourselves. Oh, yeah. I really need to fix this. Oh, when what we found again in the research is, hey, instead of getting angry at yourself for feeling angry or bitter, let's dig into that a little bit and figure out what's going on for you so that you can address the underlying issue and get to a healthy place. And we're going to be teaching you how to do that a little bit later in the episode.
So
go.
So can I share a personal, I was going to say, I guess kind of a personal revelation.
Yeah, go ahead.
A personal insight. So when I was serving as a bishop, I wrote several different little quotes. I'm kind of a one-liner kind of a person. I love one-liners, and not like as a pickup line, right? Like I was never a pickup line person, but one-liners just
liar. Like you're lying right now. Never pick up. You asked me, your pickup line for me when we were dating was, "Do you like to eat?" It was a one-liner pickup line. Yes, you do. Proceed, Mason.
Let's see. Did you go on a date with me?
I did.
All right, good. It worked. Okay. So, just another caveat. I use that line more than once.
That's not a Sarah-specific line.
No, I'm afraid not.
Man.
I'm afraid not. So anyway, I like powerful statements that are just like one line. They're real simple things that you can remember. And one of the ones that I put up there was, and I'm trying to remember exactly how I said it, but essentially it was, because I can't remember exactly what it was, but I could have done better is not a helpful statement. And I explained that so the other leaders of the ward, the parish, whatever group you would be in.
Right. So let's pause right here. So for our non-Mormon listeners, a ward is a congregation based on geographical location.
Yeah.
And usually that is, I'm going to say, approximately 500 people on the rolls with what, Mason, 125 to 150 active members, participating members on that roll. Although nowadays, as the Mormon Church is hemorrhaging members, that looks very different in most areas.
That was kind of a little jab.
That was so based on the numbers that are coming out of, oh goodness, the Pew Research something or other. There's quite a bit of hemorrhaging, and so there's a lot more. What we're finding based on that research is that there's a lot more empty pews in all church congregations, and so those numbers may no longer be accurate. So I apologize. That was not meant to be a jab, but rather the research is showing that, like other religions, the Mormon Church is hemorrhaging members, and if you take your name off their records, supposedly they no longer count you as a member. I don't know if that's actually true. I don't know how any of those numbers work because I've never been there. But the numbers that I've seen when I've come with you to church in this congregation or in others is that those numbers are absolutely dwindling, which would indicate to me that probably the numbers for a ward and those people that are not participating weekly has gotten larger with the active numbers getting smaller. That's an assumption. And Mason, go ahead and proceed with
the idea being that you want somewhere between 100 and 300 active participants. But a ward is like a parish or it's your local church group. So as I would meet with the other leaders in that ward, we'd meet every week. And one of the things I would focus on, and this was after I had started to learn from Brene Brown about shame and from you about shame. I still didn't have the emotional intelligence that I needed or have now, but I was learning about shame and how powerful a negative message that is. And so when we say something like, I could have done better, and we say it in that way, like it's almost like we're beating ourselves up because we should have done better. It's not that we're saying we could have done better, but that we should have done better. And now we're beating ourselves up for it. And that's not helpful because the reality is that statement is going to always be true. Right. Or almost always, right? Maybe not always, but almost always you're going to be able to say, I could have done that better. And so it's not a very helpful message. Now, the flip side of that was if you sit down and you go, how could I have done that better? Or how could I have done that differently that would have led to a better outcome? Now you're talking about introspection. Now you're inviting yourself to sit down and go, what is it about that outcome that I'm not happy with or that I'm angry about or bitter or resentful or whatever the emotion is, allowing yourself to sit with that emotion so that you can learn how to manage the situation differently in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I like the way that you did that because later on we're going to talk about the power behind what and how questions, because what and how gets you curious, whereas why indicates judgment. And as you get curious about what's going on, you're able to call yourself to action and have more power to change and shift directions. Right. So very good.
And I don't want these messages, like the message we're talking about today, I don't want these messages to leave someone in a place of shame because that is not where you grow. And so if you can, and again, not trying to diminish or increase anybody's faith, really just trying to recognize that there are underlying messages here that people are getting. Right. It's not that they're not getting sold. Like I think in general, the Mormon Church doesn't teach us actively that we'll never be good enough. I don't feel like that's the message that's actually taught, but I do feel like it's an underlying message that's taught.
Absolutely. And I just want to put a plug in here. So a lot of the ideas that we are coming up with here with shame is coming directly from the research team over there with Brene Brown in Texas. And we want to make sure if you want more information on the impact of shame in your life, absolutely go to the Brene Brown. I can't remember what her institute or what her program is called, but Google Brene Brown, read her books. They are phenomenal, and they're really going to help you dig into how paralyzing shame is. So I feel like as we're utilizing her research and rephrasing it here, we definitely want to give her the credit for that. So go ahead, Mason. Let's shift now to, so we've talked about 2 Bible scriptures. Let's shift into messages that we are getting, or the messaging that we are getting from church leaders with regards to our emotional state. And again, specifically, like you said, Mason, anger seems to be the one that is focused on the most. So we're going to stick with that anger. Go ahead.
Which one are you wanting?
I was looking at hymn number 336.
Okay.
And how the hymn demonstrates a fairly positive message emotionally, but then how Thomas S. Monson's use of that in general conference and his subsequent counsel leaves a completely different message. So,
okay. So this
make
is
sure you're giving the name of the hymn and the composer.
So this is actually quoted in President Monson's, or Thomas S. Monson's talk from October of 2009, School Thy Feelings, from General Conference. So he quotes this hymn. It's hymn number 336, School Thy Feelings.
And it is composed by, I think I've got it right here. Yes, it's composed by Charles Penrose,
who was an apostle in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Okay.
So anyway, he says, this is the hymn, I'm just going to read it. School thy feelings, O my brother, train thy warm, impulsive soul.
Pause. So I like that. It's training impulsivity.
Yeah.
Not get rid of the emotions, but train yourself to respond differently rather than impulsively.
Yeah,
impulsively.
Then you're going to love this next line.
I can't wait.
Do not its emotions smother.
There you go. Don't smother your emotions. See, I like this. When we read this, I remember going, wow, I really like this hymn. It's good.
Right.
We don't want to smother the emotional responses. Our emotions are healthy and good.
Right.
There we go. Our emotions are good. I'm totally polarized. Our emotions are good for us. They are healthy.
Normal, right? Our emotions are normal. But let wisdom's voice control. School thy feelings. There is power in the cool, collected mind. Passion shatters reason's tower, makes the clearest vision blind. It's almost like he's talking poetically about the amygdala and the frontal cortex.
Oh, he totally is. He may not know that, but
he probably didn't.
He totally is, right? I really like that hymn. Did you have more verses or just that one?
No, that's it. So that's the last of.
So that's the first verse,
there are more verses,
right?
But that's all that I had written.
Okay,
down.
so I don't have those other verses in front of me. So, and sometimes I'll do a Mormon hymn, and I'm like, oh, I really like this. The first and second verse are great, and then the second and third, or the third and fourth, I'm like,
oh, we better look it up
here.
All right,
never mind. So we're just going to stick with the first verse of this song. Yeah, Mason, I'm going to agree. It's a great song that illustrates the dynamic between your frontal cortex and your amygdala. All right, so go ahead and talk to us about Thomas S. Monson's talk and what he said. And I want
for the record,
go ahead.
That was just the first verse, and there are 5 verses.
Yeah, we're not going to go through
the
other 4 today.
So there may be lots of other messages in there, but from that first verse, we really like the messages that come from that. We're going to
stop while we're ahead. We liked the first verse. It's working for us. And we're going to shift into Thomas S. Monson's talk. And I'm going to repeat, Mason, what you had said earlier in that intended meaning versus stated meaning, there's a huge difference. I agree with you. I don't think the intention is to smother our emotions, but the words that they're using to describe it are teaching us to do that. And in my opinion, based on the toxic culture within the Mormon church, there is a culture there and in other religions that what we consider or utilize negative emotions, or what I like to say better is uncomfortable emotions, or emotions that make us uncomfortable, are bad, evil, and sinful. So I want to kind of, as Mason gets ready to read this little bit of this talk, I want our listeners to be able to identify the difference between the intended meaning and what he actually said.
I was listening to a general conference talk and I heard him quote this hymn, and then I heard him share a message that's a little different, I would probably give more authority to the message he shared, not the hymn that he quoted.
And why is that?
Well, he's a prophet of God, right? He's the new prophet. At that time, he was the prophet, the president of the church, and he's the voice of God.
Literally. So in the Mormon
church,
God, especially in general conference, if the prophet is speaking, that is considered direct revelation from God. Go ahead, Mason. What did he say?
Right. Well, in general conference, it's not canonized scripture, but a lot of people consider it pretty much the same. All right, so what he says is, I ask, is it possible to feel the Spirit of our Heavenly Father when we are angry? I know of no instance where such would be the case. So this is part of it. I don't know if you wanted to stop there.
No, well, my red flags, my counselor red flags are already cringing, and I've already heard this. You read the scripture multiple times, and I'm still just like, oh, that's not true. Keep going.
Well, and I wanted, if I pause there for a second, it's like, I know of no instance where that would be the case. In other words, he's saying it is absolutely not humanly possible for us to feel the Spirit and be angry.
Right.
And I just don't...
Well, especially if he's speaking for God. So if God is saying, I know of no instance, that means never.
Right.
Not when Jesus... all-inclusive words.
Not when Jesus was in the temple with a whip, not...
Right.
When he told his disciples who wanted him to start a revolution, when he told them to get away from me, Satan, not, there's lots of instances where you could look at somebody and think that maybe they are in fact angry and still close to the Spirit. And so, again, the message, I don't know exactly what message he was trying to share. I think it was that we need to control our anger. But it's not what was said, and I feel like that is really
it's a very dangerous
message.
That is a very dangerous message to tell people that you cannot experience God in your life if you're angry.
Right.
Even if you do not believe in God, that is still a dangerous message.
Right. Well, and it doesn't get better.
Okay.
So he continues, he says, to be angry is to yield to the influence of Satan. Right? So we've kind of talked about that already, but just the idea that if we are angry, we've allowed Satan into our lives, and it's just not true. No one, so he continues, no one can make us angry. It is our choice. Maybe that's true.
No,
but
I'm sorry. That amygdala, remember the amygdala fires
before the frontal cortex,
much
right?
faster, and it has to keep us alive. And anger is a very common emotion that comes as part of that fight, flight, freeze, fawn response, because our anger is usually protective. It's usually covering up something that makes us feel vulnerable or threatened. So, for example, when my kiddo runs in front of the car and I grab their hand and I yank them back to the sidewalk and I yell at them, why were you running out in front of that car? And I swat their butt. That's my amygdala that's spanking my kiddo. I'm really not mad at the kiddo. They're 3 years old, that they don't have any idea, but I was afraid. And so anger is frequently a cover up or a shield for fear or other vulnerable feelings. It can also just be straight up anger.
Right.
No, anger is healthy, anger is informative, and it is one of the most common emotions. Like when we do research and say, what emotions do you feel? Everybody marks out, almost everybody, I'm sure, marks down anger, because it's one of those things that we learn when we're little. Are you mad?
Right.
Yeah, I'm mad. Okay, that's anger.
Right. Of the few emotions I can recognize in my life, anger is definitely one of them.
Anger is so popular that anger made it into the movie Inside Out. Y'all, I'm telling you, anger was there.
That's right. So I was looking, as just kind of another caveat here, when you said that, I said something that anger is the emotion of injustice, right? And you said that there are other things, but do you know who Susan Rosenthal is? Okay. So I don't know either, but on a Google search here, it says anger does not need to be managed. Anger is not the problem. The injustice that provokes it is the problem. Inequality has always provoked protest. And so one of the things, and I'd heard this from someone
else.
else.
That's a great quote. And I know that you like it extra, extra good because it, brings home your point from earlier.
Yeah, absolutely, right? I'm verifying what I said.
You're verifying, yep. Cognitive bias at its finest. No, that's a great quote.
I heard it from someone else, and I think it was from the Permission to Feel book.
Yeah, that's a good one too.
But I can't remember for sure. But anyway, I've hung on to that one because understanding what is going on that has provoked the emotion is helpful in processing it, right?
Absolutely.
All right, so Thomas S. Monson goes on. He says, "It is our choice. If we desire to have a proper spirit with us at all times, we must choose to refrain from becoming angry. I testify that such is possible." And,
I don't like that refrain from feeling angry. I'm going to say if you feel angry, the goal is to always dig into it. See, I'm using an all-inclusive word here. The goal is to dig into it.
Yeah.
So that you can better understand what's going on. Because when we dig into it and identify those things, we are more likely to experience that anger with less intensity and less frequency over time.
Right.
And so the best way for us to quote unquote manage our anger is to understand it rather than shut it up. Yeah. And so Mason, you mentioned the book Permission to Feel. And that book is, I wanted to make sure we're giving creds here. So Permission to Feel, Unlocking the Power of Emotions to Help Our Kids, Ourselves, and Our Society Thrive. And that is written by Mark Brackett, who is a PhD and the director of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence and a professor of the Yale Child Study Center.
Yeah, he does a podcast. He's a guest on the podcast with Brene Brown, Unlocking Us, and it was one of my favorites. Just because again, I'm not a very emotionally intelligent person. It's been a journey trying to figure that out, and so that podcast in general was very helpful.
Yeah, it's a very good book. I definitely on my reading list for sure.
And I want to come back to this message. This is not about what message he was trying to send, right? Like, I think there's lots of positive messages.
You don't think it was the message he was trying to send. Maybe it was. I don't really know. We can't jump in his head and see.
Right, I can't figure that out. So
what was he trying to do?
So that's not what this is about, is trying to discover, well, what message was he trying to send? That's not what this is about. What it's about is recognizing where messages get sent that are not healthy for us emotionally.
Right.
And so if we can look at that and go, people who are strong members of in this case, because it's Monson, strong members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, they're going to go, okay, yeah, that wasn't very good. What can I learn from that that's positive? And that's fine, right?
Right. Well, and I'm going to say that in my life, in our introduction episode, I explained that I was from Snowflake, Arizona, which when I was growing up there in the 80s and 90s, it was highly populated LDS and whatnot. And it was not until I started studying behavioral health that I learned the value of anger, that it was healthy, that it was safe, that it was good, that it was protective. So we're talking about my higher education, and I would say probably not until late into my bachelor's program, because the beginning of my bachelor's program is English and math and science and all the subjects that made me angry because I didn't want to study more English and math when I got to college. But I did not learn that anger is just a tool in our belt. And I absolutely love like Disney's, Pixar's Inside Out, which and a lot of these other programs that are beginning to normalize, hey, anger isn't the problem.
Right.
What we do with that anger can be problematic, but anger is not the problem.
Or even like Susan Rosenthal said in there, it's not anger that's the problem. It's whatever helped cause the anger. In this case, injustice is what the problem is. So there's anger in the middle. There's the things that led you to be angry. Those are the problem. Right. And then there's what you do with the anger that can be the problem. They're not always a problem. Some of the things we do with anger are very positive things. If they lead to change, positive change, if they lead to less inequality, that's a positive outcome from anger.
The trigger for that anger isn't always a problem either. I look at Tyler, our youngest, where if he trips and falls, his initial response is to be angry at whoever or whatever.
Who built the stairs?
Is within the 6 feet of him. That's who's getting blamed. Like, I have seen that kid fall down and blame his sister who was sitting on the couch 4 feet away and yell at her and get up and hit her. That's poor kid. He's so cute. He's got a little temper on him. But yeah, so it's what provokes that anger also isn't always a bad thing, because it's anger is anger.
The what did you say? What kind of thinking is it we're talking about? The polarized thinking.
Polarized thinking.
We don't want the polarized thinking. We don't want to say whatever caused the anger is always the problem. Right? Because it's not necessarily. It can be. Whatever you do with the anger, well, that's the problem. Well, maybe not, right? It can be a problem, or it can be a huge boon to who you are. And so, we don't want to fall into the polarized thinking of, because this, then this, so this.
Right.
That is dangerous for us, and it doesn't allow for much growth.
Yeah, well, and I think that's what really stunts growth. The issue with polarized thinking is that it stunts our growth in many ways. And I would say that it is one of the leading causes for emotional immaturity. And unfortunately, emotional immaturity is epidemic within the Mormon culture and the Mormon religion. I actually had a friend ask me the other day, well, doesn't somebody have to be narcissistic to be a good leader? With regards to Donald Trump. And I was like, no, definitely not. The best leaders are not narcissistic. The best leaders have wide and broad emotional intelligence and are able to regulate themselves emotionally while working through problems and those types of things. And I'm definitely going to say no. Narcissism is not a requirement for effective leadership. Whether you're pro-Trump or not, narcissism is just, it's an unhealthy characteristic trait that causes harm to so many people. Right. So the question, let's shift gears here. So the question that we had at the beginning is, okay, so what do we do with all of this information? And since that's our purpose of this podcast, is let's give you a call to action. I want to teach a little bit about completing that emotional cycle. Yeah. So let's talk about completing that emotional cycle. So one of the things that I teach in clinic is that when we have an emotional response, there's, hormones and other things that get fired in our brain and throughout our body that create energy. This is, that we then have to utilize. And so when we're talking about completing the emotional cycle for Sarah, what that means is I need to give it the time and the space and the thought that it needs, and then I need to do something with that emotion. And once I've completed each of those steps, I'm going to reach a place in life where I feel resolved, like there's a resolution that has happened. It's going to prevent the development of psychopathology, specifically anxiety and depression. And so that's what I'm going to teach you today. So you might want to grab a paper, pause the podcast if you need to, grab a paper and a pen so that way you can write this down. I've kind of got my own unique spin on this. I'm also pulling from a lot of the research that informs my treatment here in clinic. And so I want you to be prepared for that piece of things. Alrighty, so what do we do with emotions? And I like to utilize the acronym in my clinic. I want you to RAID the emotional cycle. And what I mean by RAID is I want you to really dig in and pull out those hidden pieces that are in there so that they can be examined and understood. And so what that R stands for in RAID, so RAID, R-A-I-D, what the R stands for is recognize and name. So this is where what you're going to do is say, I'm feeling and insert a feeling emotion. Now, I have a lot of clients that struggle with this. They'll be like, well, I feel that when you did blah, 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 and they go on, and I'm like, whoa, 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 time out. That is not an emotion. You are describing the situation. I want you to be able to say, I feel joyful. Sorry, my microphone just went crazy there for a second. Okay, so I feel joyful, or I feel eager. I feel humiliated. I feel hurt. I feel angry. I feel sad. I'm feeling overwhelmed. I want you to insert at this point a feeling word. Now, one of the research studies, and I don't have that right in front of me, but I want to say that when they did research on emotional verbiage, like the words that people use for emotions, it was something like 6 words was the average, and please don't quote me on this, whereas what we're wanting to see is the use of over 25 emotional or feeling words to describe our emotions in order to get specific for this. And so if you're really struggling to come up with words that describe common emotional experiences for you, I'm going to challenge you to get on Google and type in list of feeling words, and you're going to have lists that have thousands of words and lists that have hundreds of words, and try and pull from that and then utilize those words. You know, it's very uncommon for me to have somebody come and be like, yeah, I was feeling very eager about my trip to the Bahamas this summer. Eager's not a commonly used emotional word. So let's expand. In order to expand our emotional IQ, we've also got to expand our emotional vocabulary. And so I definitely want to challenge you with that. So our first letter R is recognize and name. Call it what it is. Mason, did you have a question there?
No.
Okay. For a minute there, it looked like you had a question. Okay. So our A in RAID is...
I was thinking vocabulistics. I was thinking
yeah.
Vocabulary needs to be improved. Yeah, we need to work on our vocabulistics.
Absolutely. Our next one, the A, is for acceptance and acknowledgement of its presence. And this is where I'm going to say also give yourself permission for it to be there. This is where we say... It is okay that I am mad at my children for scattering mini Legos all over the floor and not cleaning them up when I ask them to. This is a normal response. And what we're doing when we give ourselves permission to have those feelings is we're soothing that amygdala response, because our amygdala is coming in saying, hey, do you recognize that this was an assault? Do you recognize that there's a problem here? And so for us to cognitively be able to say, it is okay that I am angry right now. By doing that, we are better able to stay in that frontal cortex, that creative problem-solving space better. So that is accept it. The other thing is to acknowledge how it's affecting you. You know, when I feel angry, we talk about feeling. It's because our emotions come as physiological sensations. And I believe that our emotional responses are actually our sixth sense, because we don't have control over those. If I come and kick you, Mason, in the shins, you are going to feel hot in your chest and clenched in your muscles. You're going to have involuntary responses, just like if I'm cooking a hamburger and you walk into the area where the little smelly things are, you're going to smell that hamburger. So a lot of people in my field look at our emotions and our feelings as a sixth sense, because we don't have the type of control over them that people like to think we do. At least like not those initial emotional responses to stimuli. Right. And I would say more so than that.
You can control or manage a continued response, but not necessarily that first response. I really like that. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say as we're acknowledging our emotions or where they're living in our body, that's what I like to tell my clients is, where is this emotion living in your body? For me, Sarah...
I suck at this part, by the way.
I know you do, and that's okay. I'll help you. For me, Sarah Westbrook, when I'm angry, I tend to clench my jaw, I tend to feel hot in my chest, and I tend to kind of like pull my shoulders in tight, which is probably why I get a lot of tension headaches when I'm feeling irritable, because that is where I tend to hold that energy. That is where that anger lives in my body. And so for me to say, it's okay that I'm feeling angry. Hey, neck, I see that you're tight, and I purposefully relax those muscles, I'm also able to really get in and dig into that anger, because as I release that tension, once again, those creative skills come back online.
Do you think that's contagious? Because the funny thing is when you're irritable, I end up with neck pain too.
Because I whack you one, or because you get irritable? No, the answer to your question is hell yes.
Right.
Our
Because
emotions
when you're
are
irritable, I can feel that. And
right.
Yeah, absolutely.
If mama ain't happy, nobody's happy. If daddy ain't happy, nobody's happy.
That's it. I'm going to start blaming a lot of my headaches on you.
Oh, that will be super effective and bring us closer together as a couple. You do that, babe. No, you're absolutely correct. Yes, our emotional states are absolutely contagious.
Absolutely,
I think we talk about in my field that anxiety is the most contagious one. You know, you and I can be having, well, we'll just put it this way. When you and I are having a happy conversation, our family, we're eating dinner, and then God bless Brig comes in and he's in that elevated, intense, schizophrenic state.
Everybody gets more tense.
The entire family crumbles. Like a happy family dinner turns into, you don't touch your sister, you go over there, don't throw your food, stop kicking butt. Like it destroys that. And I think
deteriorate pretty quickly.
It does. And Brig gratefully recognizes that and has learned, hey, I'm feeling really intense. I'm going to avoid family dinner with the little kids and wait to go find mom until it's just mom. And I can walk in and be like, I'm intense. And mom will be like, okay, let me put up my protective barriers to this so that way I can stay engaged with you without allowing that in. But yes, absolutely. Our emotions are contagious.
Right.
And I would say that most people are able to pinpoint to a time where, you know, they went out on like a lunch date with somebody who's really sad and they all came home depressed, or they were in a meeting and somebody came in angry or anxious and everybody
the
left.
Whole day for everybody. Yeah.
Or, you know, we hear all the time, smile at people in the hallways. Well, because happiness and joy can be contagious. Absolutely. We can share our emotional states with others. Just like if, you know, McDonald's is cooking hamburgers and you and I drive through that space, we both go, ooh, those smell good. And then I say, it's McDonald's. We'll go there for the kids and I want something different. Okay. So our I in the raid is inquisitive or get curious. And this is one of the hardest parts for people because our brain likes answers fast. It wants to make sense of things very, very quickly. Our brain is resistant to digging in and taking time to understand things. So this I, or the inquisitive and the curiosity, takes a lot of practice. And this is where I really encourage my clients to employ what and how questions. So, or even where. Where is a good question. So where is this anger coming from? What might be making this anger worse? What could be causing this? You could say, what did I eat for breakfast? Or how am I feeling? Where am I at on the Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Did I get enough sleep tonight?
Yeah.
Am I hangry? Because, you know, Sarah knows if she's hungry,
am I even in a good place to try and figure this out?
Right. Yeah. What causes this thing to be so triggering for me? You know, and so we're going to really get into these what and how questions. Let's get curious to understand that anger. Now, there's a trap here, and that's that cognitive bias trap. If I'm in my brain and I'm saying, oh, well, my anger is because of Mason and Mason and Mason, that's a red flag. You're not understanding you. You're not understanding you. These need to be curiosity questions for myself. So for example, I might say, I'm feeling really angry and defensive. Mason is yelling at me. I don't like being yelled at. My mom used to yell at me a lot when I was a kid, and I always felt afraid. I don't like being yelled at because my brain shuts down and I can't think through the problem anymore. Hey, now I'm understanding why yelling is so uncomfortable for me. Right. So if I'm stuck in, well, I'm mad because I'm mad because they, and I continue to point back to that they, I'm not gaining the introspection. Remember, our emotions are here to inform us. I'm angry because I feel vulnerable when my anger is protecting me. And then we can also say, that's what my brain is supposed to do. You know what? My brain, Mason, when you yell at me and I get triggered and I start to shut down, and that makes me really angry because I only shut down for like a half a second and then I'm like coming out with the claws. I can recognize I don't like being yelled at. I've never liked being yelled at, but my brain is protecting me. I'm getting this angry feeling to say, you feel vulnerable, get safe. And I can be very grateful for that. I'm thankful that my anger alerted me to the fact that I'm feeling vulnerable right now.
Right.
I'm going to speak my vulnerability in order to resolve the issue, because chances are you don't want me to feel vulnerable, but something you've said has just been triggering. Oftentimes, I would say in my clinic, more often than not, couples are fighting about something that doesn't have to do with the original issue,
right?
Because they got derailed somewhere in the communication. Whereas if they can learn to talk about, if my couples can learn to talk about and empathize and validate each other's experiences of, I started yelling at you because I felt attacked and I felt really vulnerable. And then you're able to say, that makes sense to me. I didn't see it that way. I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to attack you.
That was the case.
Now we've had this resolution, this connection, and we can come together. So get curious, raid, recognize, A, accept, I, inquisit. Yes.
Question, is this the part of that process where you might also start to recognize that you're not processing in a normal way? Like, for instance, what I mean, like PTSD, you notice that instead of having and I hate to use the word normal in this case, but instead of having a normal processing of a situation, your mind is obviously processing it abnormally because of some sort of process, and then you can can focus on that and work on that as well.
It's okay to be like, okay, where is this anger coming from? And for you to say, you know what? I don't really know.
I don't know.
Or I keep getting stuck on this. Absolutely. This is that get curious. So if you can say, I'm angry and I feel my anger in my shoulders and my stomach muscles the most, and I can't figure out what's causing it, and I don't know what the source is, go get help. Go seek out a counselor or a trusted friend or somebody who knows you better than you. But yes, absolutely.
I think that's what's most helpful for someone in my situation, is that I recognize I do not have all the answers. And so as I learn this process, and I started to learn this process from Mark Brackett, actually, again, from Permission to Feel, who has it outlined as well, kind of similarly, but in a different acronym.
Yeah, I've heard several different acronyms. This is the one that I did, and I'm sure I'm not alone in having this acronym.
Right.
But yeah.
But anyway, so I think it's important to recognize that as you're starting this process, you may not have all the, and most likely you won't have all the answers, and you won't be able to adequately describe what you're going through. And if you find that that's a pattern and it's leading to your inability to manage your emotions, then you need to get some help. You need to get somebody who can help you sort through them. I'm a very intelligent person, right?
Yep.
This isn't about your intelligence level or your ability to learn something. It is about not knowing how sometimes.
Right. Just because I'm intelligent doesn't mean I know everything.
Right. Or if a lot of times our emotional unintelligence or our emotional immaturity is related to things that we don't even really understand. They're related to some sort of trauma or whatever. And if we can get somebody else involved,
modeled for us,
we just never saw it. We have no healthy example of how to do this. Then we get someone who can help talk us through this, and we learn how to do it. So I absolutely encourage. I'm married to a therapist, and I still didn't really understand this until someone outside of my little circle was able to help me kind of get through it.
Which is why they teach us not to therapize our own family members, because it's very difficult to learn these things from somebody that you're super close to.
Sure.
I would also say that in this inquisitive, really the I is about utilizing your rational, logical thinking skills to understand yourself better. So the I is strengthening your cortex responses so that you can inform your brain differently. And again, over time, your responses will begin to change, or they will become less intense and less frequent, so that way you snap out of it. a little bit faster.
Now we're schooling our feelings, right?
Right. Well, and on this one, it's okay to say, I'm recognizing this pattern of anger and I'm not very good sitting with it. Hey, you know what? I recognize that in my church environment, in my religious structure, I was told that feeling this way was a sin. And I've also spent my life trying to avoid sin and therefore avoiding anger. It's all connected. And once you're able to make that connection and go, hang on a minute, that message doesn't work for me. And we can say, my anger is healthy, and it is, again, okay that I feel this way. Even if I don't understand it, this is natural, this is normal.
Separate out the pieces.
Right. As we tear apart those pieces and then put them back together again, we can make those connections. Because what I see in my clinic when working with clients who are LDS is that it's very difficult for them to really dig in to these uncomfortable emotional experiences, or what a lot of people will identify as your negative emotional experiences, because they do believe that that means Satan has control over them. And I would say, if I can recognize that I'm angry because my children have not listened to me and I've asked them to pick up these Legos 50 times, that is okay. And what I can learn from that is maybe we need to have a different organization schedule or a different structure in place so that way we can get these Legos cleaned up. Because, I always go back to my dad used to give us this huge extreme example why our bedrooms had to be cleaned. It was because if your bedroom isn't cleaned and the house burns down, the firemen are going to trip on your toys. That's what my dad used to teach us. And so instead of going to these really extreme places where our anger takes us, when we don't understand where it's coming from, we're more likely to jump into that place where anger does harm. If I understand my anger, where it's coming from, and I can kind of shift my perspective on it, I'm a lot less likely to do myself or others harm. And if I find that every time I'm with this person, they make me angry, or every time I do this, that hurts me, well, then maybe I need to shift things long before I get angry. Not to avoid anger, but to learn the lesson anger is trying to teach me. So this really digs in. We talked about, I think it was in the last episode, in episode 1, that, I just lost my train of thought, that we need to pay attention. There it is. My thought came back, that we need to pay attention to our body and those physiological indicators. We need to turn inward to understand that in order to have a different outward expression. And that's what this does. That's really where this inquisitive and get curious happens. There's also no timestamp on this. You can take, you can 2 weeks later come back to and be like, all right, what was that really about? If it takes you that time to do that.
Let me write this one down because I can't deal with it right now.
Right. That's okay. That's healthy.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of times I almost approach my anger with more anger, right? I become mad at myself because I'm angry. Right. And then I perpetuate this cycle where I'm not inquisitive, right? It's not safe for me because I approach my anger with anger. That's the whole problem with shame, right? Is that now I'm kicking myself over this instead of taking the time to be inquisitive. What's going on here? Yeah.
Well, and in the example that we gave in episode 1, where your brother kind of attacked me out of anger because of a difference of opinion posted on Facebook, if the response had been, I am feeling protective of my wife.
Right.
And it had been fleshed out a little bit, maybe his response to me could have been, hey, I'm feeling really angry right now. Your posts are having this impact on my family. I'd really like to talk about it.
Right.
Now we have a completely different response, right? Rather than I'm an asshole and you just need to deal with
that. We're not fighting it. We're opening up a discussion.
Right. And that's the goal here. And again, I think there's always this rush, we've got to understand it right now. And our brain does that rush, but the church kind of supports that, and that religion of, if you feel angry, you need to repent right now. And I can't repent of something when I don't understand it.
right? Get rid of those things with all malice. I feel like there's a timestamp on that one too. Like, get rid of it now.
Right.
Get rid of it with extreme prejudice, right?
Absolutely. All right. So then our last one is the D of RAID, RAID, and D is discharge or utilize that energy. Remember in the beginning, I said that we have these hormonal changes in our body that gives us the energy to respond. So especially if we're in that fight, flight, freeze, fawn mode, we have our blood diverted away from the brain and into the major muscle groups in order to run or fight back and whatnot. And so that energy gets stored inside our bodies. And by doing something as simple as going for a walk, or if I'm feeling sad and I feel that tingle of tears in my eyes and I'm like, no, I'm not going to cry. I'm going to swallow these tears. Really, your body is saying, I need to cry in order to discharge some of this emotion. Now, I understand I'm going to hold in my tears until I'm in a place where I feel safe crying, but it's very good to go back to that and say, okay, when I was feeling this way, I'm going to bring it back up and I'm going to start this RAID cycle while I'm locked into the bathroom on my lunch break, and I'm going to shed a few tears while I'm locked in the stall by myself. That helps our body literally metabolize the excess cortisol and adrenaline that's been released into our body for this. Personal example for me of utilizing this discharge piece is, like I said earlier, I tend to feel my anger in my chest, in my jaw, in my neck, and I don't think I said this, but also in my biceps. And I have found that one of the best ways for me to discharge that is to throw or hit something. That is healthy as long as I am doing no harm. And so I tell my clients that I have a tantrum tree, and I do, out on our property. So we own 15 acres, and gratefully I don't have any neighbors that are close to judge me. And if they do judge me, I don't really care. But I have a tantrum tree, and I have some knickknacks that I've hidden from the kids that are in a box. And when I get really angry and I go for a walk, or I do some push-ups, or I do something else, and it's not working for me to get that anger out, and I just have that urge to hit something. Before we got the punching bag, now I do the punching bag thing, but before we got the punching bag, I would take that box of cheap knickknacks that I picked up at a thrift store that had no significant meaning to anybody, and I would throw those knickknacks at a tree, and listening to the shatter of glass and throwing it as hard as I could while screaming obscenities was very helpful for me. So we talk about, for a lot of my clients, we talk about like give a primal scream in your car while you're driving. What these things do is it burns off the energy where the body is storing the energy. And so when I feel like that is stuck in my biceps, a walk is no good for me. And I don't do push-ups anymore because I've hurt my shoulder. So doing those push-ups really aggravates my shoulder, but swinging a bat helps me. So if I take that bat to the dead tree outside and I'm not causing harm to myself or somebody else, then even those aggressive outlets can be very healthy. So the D in this is discharge, or use the energy in a manner that causes no harm.
Yeah.
When you finish this cycle, your last step is to check in. Am I feeling better? Am I feeling worse? Also check in and make sure, let's check things out on the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's very common when we burn off that type of energy to feel really hungry or really tired afterwards because we've utilized a lot of energy. I would say make sure you're aware of what you're putting into your body. Emotional eating is a normal thing. Make sure that as you're putting that food in your body that you've got those nutrient dense things, that it's not becoming an out of control habit, that it's not influencing weight gain or weight loss. Make sure you're rested, make sure you're well hydrated. And as you meet those physiological needs, things should return to homeostasis. If they don't, then you can give some time and space, like go to sleep, cover it again the next day or in a couple of weeks. You can go through the RAID cycle again, but if you get stuck, get help. And that's where I would say get out, go find yourself a licensed professional counselor, go find yourself, or a LMFT or an LCSW. There's lots of behavioral health people, psychologists, and all these. Go out and find yourself I prefer a licensed professional, but that does not devalue the beauty of a life coach who's been well trained and understands these things. Find somebody
best
you
friend who
feel
just has some experience.
right, a best friend or a spouse
Someone
or your
that
parent,
can listen
or
without judgment.
somebody who listens without judgment, and talk it out and see if you can gain insight. Again, when you're talking it out, utilize the RAID cycle with that person. State, I'm feeling blank because of blank. I feel my anger here. These are the things that I've connected. I've got a very good friend that lives about 45 minutes away, and when I get stuck, I go visit her, and I'm like, hey, Laura, this is where I'm at. And she normally gives me the insight I couldn't see myself so that I can make those connections, and it's very healthy. So if you get stuck, get help. Mason, did you have anything else you wanted to say before we end this?
I absolutely love that explanation. If you guys are like me, you're going to need to come back to that a couple of times. That was a lot of information and very, very valuable. I love things that can get put into an acronym or something like that, because you can remember. Like I don't have any tattoos. I seriously pondered getting a tattoo that said ruler on my wrist, because that's Mark Brackett. He does ruler, R-U-L-E-R. Seriously pondered doing that because I wanted to become more emotionally healthy, and I wanted something that would remind me of that all the time. And I didn't do that, but come back to it. Come back to that information. I love that you have shared something that is kind of a conglomeration of research and experience. You're not the only one to do this, but you found a way to make it real for you. And you found a way to make that real transfer to the people that you work with too. And I absolutely love that. We are about tools. We're about providing ways for us to move through over in a healthy way what we're trying to get through. And so I absolutely love that explanation. Thank you for sharing that. And I hope that you guys listening will come back to it. Come back to it again and again, and just listen to that part. When you're in a good place, listen to it again and again until you can practice that in your daily life.
Absolutely. And we'll make that RAID explanation into a short, so that way you can come back to just that segment rather than have to listen to the entire episode again. So we will absolutely do that for you. Again, if you have any questions or comments about today's show, feel free to visit us at our website at daisygirlcommunications.com. Email us at daisygirlcommunications@gmail.com, or call or leave a text at 573-569-1076. Thanks.
We love you guys. Thank you.
Bye. Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma is hosted by Sarah and Mason Westbrook. Produced by Alex Vidalas and Daisy Girl Communications. Music by Lorenzo Emanuel.
I'm excited to be here.